Hello, Milwaukee Bucks fans. Welcome back to another episode of Bucks Latest presented by Fan Arch. I'm your host, as always, Dean Simon. And before we get into everything, please make sure to leave a like and leave a comment down below. Also, subscribe. We are still very much on the road to 1,000 subscribers, but we are about to cross the 900 subscriber threshold. I can't believe we've reached that mark already. And thank you to everybody that's already hit that big red button down below. But if we can get a few more of you guys to do that, I would greatly appreciate it. Also, turn on post notifications so you don't miss out on future episodes and you stay up to date on all the latest Milwaukee Bucks updates. Okay, so now that we got all that out of the way, today's episode is going to be centered around the Milwaukee Bucks potential matchups in the postseason, which, granted, it's not clear cut that the Milwaukee Bucks are going to notch a guaranteed playoff berth in 25-26, but I really do believe that at least the defensive front court of Giannis and Myles Turner, with both of them playing a healthy season, that duo and the effectiveness of that duo alone on both sides of the floor can at least help the Bucks notch the sixth seed at the very least. Just hoping that the Milwaukee Bucks get a guaranteed playoff berth in 25-26. And I know that it's going to be very competitive still, even though it's a decidedly weaker Eastern Conference than even in previous years. But that's what this episode is going to be centered on, and we're just going to be mentioning a few teams that could rival the Milwaukee Bucks in really pivotal playoff series. And, again, that's assuming the Bucks maybe get to the second round and they have to play one of these teams, or really wishful thinking the conference finals and have to face one of these teams. So, yeah, moving forward, the first team that we're going to talk about is the New York Knicks. And of course, the Knicks reached the Eastern Conference Finals in 2025 after it was their first time in 25 years reaching the conference finals. And they lost to the Indiana Pacers in 6 games, who then went on to lose in 7 to the dominant OKC Thunder. But the Knicks did a lot this offseason to try and revamp their bench unit. Of course, Tom Thibodeau was out the door the not the second the season ended, but Tom Thibodeau was ousted, and then you bring in Mike Brown. And the new thing with the Knicks is that they're really going to try and dig deeper into their bench rotation, and obviously that's something that Tom Thibodeau refused to do over his New York Knicks tenure and just throughout his entire career. He's always been big on playing his starters 42 minutes a game, and that's just that. And especially if he has the players, if he has the personnel for that kind of game plan where these guys always want to be out there, like when you get guys like Mikal Bridges, when you get guys like Josh Hart, that's exactly the kind of game plan or philosophy that they're going to roll with in terms of their rotations. But now that Mike Brown comes into town and the Knicks added 2021 sixth man of the year, Jordan Clarkson, and Gershon Yabusele, who had a pretty great comeback year for the 76ers, their bench is looking pretty like convincingly deeper and more talented all around. And they just added 2 guys that are consummate professionals that can likely contribute to a contending team if both of those guys play their roles exactly right. And for a guy like Jordan Clarkson, he even though the Bucks, I think their defense going to next year is going to be pretty solid. I have them increasing in certain defensive categories and defensive advanced stats and things like that. I feel like the Bucks are going to be a net positive defense, but when Jalen Brunson is not in the game for the New York Knicks going against the Bucks, the Bucks won't necessarily get a break when Brunson's off the court, when Towns is off the court, because you'll have guys like Jordan Clarkson and guys who are still there, like Deuce McBride and Mitchell Robinson, still wrecking havoc off of their bench. And that's going to be something that the Bucks have to get used to facing the 2025-26 iteration of the Knicks, is that this team is not scared to go past the seventh man of the rotation anymore. They have deep enough roster to really put together a great playoff rotation that can consist of maybe 8 or 9 guys that are playing consistently. And that's not even saying if they bring Landry Shamet back, if they bring Delon Wright back, who, of course could be he would be a great piece for the Milwaukee Bucks, just as kind of a safety blanket point guard off the bench to kind of ride the pine for maybe most of the year, because you would like Ryan Rollins and guards like him to play over DeLon Wright, but that's a whole nother can of worms. Um, the Knicks have a better bench, and this past season, the Knicks were one of those teams in the Eastern Conference specifically that kept Giannis more in check, where in the 3 or 4 games that Giannis played against the Knicks this past year, he was held to, I want to say, about 24 points a game and 11 rebounds and a fewer number of assists, and he couldn't hit anything from the free throw line. The Knicks were more of a team that thought we're just going to put Giannis on the line and live with it, and he ended up shooting 41 or 42% from the free throw line against the Knicks this past year. And those are going to be things that the Knicks continue to exploit when we talk about a potential playoff matchup, especially in the playoffs. That's something that this Knicks team has already uh, shown to be willing to do already. And that's not necessarily going to stop when they know that a guy like Giannis isn't going to be knocking down more than 70% of his free throws in any given playoff series, even if he's at his best. So the Knicks are going to be obviously a very tough team. And you think about the Knicks reaching the Eastern Conference Finals with a rotation of only maybe 7 guys that they actually trusted. Now that they have a deeper rotation, things are going to be a little bit different. Now, with this next one, obviously there is no Giannis stopper, and teams themselves are not Giannis stoppers because teams around the NBA have decided that they're going to devise concepts of building a wall to keep Giannis away from the basket, and it's never worked. So saying that one guy is a Giannis stopper is a pretty big stretch. But when I say that the Cavaliers and Evan Mobley's going to be coming into this year looking incredibly different. I don't know if you've seen on social media or if a couple of different uh, people in basketball media have pointed this out, but Evan Mobley, coming off of a defensive player of the year season, he has undergone a complete body transformation. That guy is jacked now. He's still like long and wiry, but he is built. And of course, people are going to kind of take that and run with it and say that he's going to average 30 and win another defensive player of the year, and just because he built up so much muscle. But now he just had a transformation that was comparable to Giannis's back a few years ago when he went from really stringy to jacked, like really jacked out of nowhere. Evan Mobley just had a very similar thing happen to him. And of course, he's got Jared Allen in the front court with him. So that's usually gonna at least make a guy like Giannis think twice about driving in. But this past year, uh, the Cavaliers were a team that Giannis himself individually dominated, even though, and I should have mentioned this for the last segment, that the Bucks, I believe, were winless against the Knicks in the regular season, and it's the same against the Cleveland Cavaliers that they did not pick up a regular season victory. And, those were hard to come by against the Cavs, a team that won, I believe, 64 games. So it's not like that's the worst thing in the world, but you would like to win at least one game against a team like that where you want to be battling in the second round of the conference finals against this kind of team. But the body transformation of Evan Mobley will play a massive part in their head to head matchups. We can't pretend like it's not. Because for what it's worth, Evan Mobley adding that extra strength onto him could be the difference of what makes him a perennial all-star, perennial all defensive first team, perennial top 3 defensive player of the year vote getter year in and year out, because we saw in recent years, let's say when the Knicks went up against the Cavaliers in the 2023 playoffs, I want to say, a guy like Julius Randle was taking Evan Mobley to town and just going straight through his chest and getting to the rim. But now you're not as confident that a guy like Julius Randle or a guy even like Giannis is just going to be able to push around a guy like Evan Mobley because he got so jacked. And of course, Evan Mobley's not the only part of this, four-pronged team of Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell and Mobley and Allen and a pretty good bench rotation. Uh, the Cavs are just going to be firing on all cylinders going into this year, and I would imagine that they're probably going to get close to the 60 win mark again. I want to say anywhere between 56 to 60. I don't think they're going to really go far over 60 because they kind of came out as a surprise in the Eastern Conference, and now teams are going to be game planning a little bit more. But we can't pretend that Evan Mobley did not make himself even more of a matchup nightmare for a guy like Giannis. And it's worth mentioning that this past year, Evan Mobley and Jared Allen, their presence didn't necessarily bother Giannis, as he still averaged. Again, individually, he was amazing. He put up like 35 and 11 and high assist numbers against the Cavs in the regular season, but the Bucks did not come away with a victory in any game against the Cavs or any game that Giannis suited up in against the Cavs. So we can't pretend that Evan Mobley's huge transformation is not going to be a major problem. But okay, the last two teams that we can talk about are teams that did similar things this offseason, which was, they took a couple of swings, and the Magic specifically were able to land Desmond Bain in the KCP and Cole Anthony trade. Of course, Cole Anthony then uh, made his way to the Milwaukee Bucks, but the Magic adding Desmond Bain, I feel like that's going to make them much more of a contender than people realize, because Desmond Bain is the exact kind of player that they needed, a guy that was building up his ability as a two-way guard with a very strong and agile body and a great center of gravity that could also shoot the lights out, and he's been developing more as a scorer and specifically as a playmaker. His passing was a really underrated part of his game this past year, and now Desmond Bain is going to take that to a Magic team that struggled mightily on the offensive end, and they have been for the past couple of years. Desmond Bain could really turn things around in terms of the Magic getting up more threes and just playing with more pace. And alongside Paolo, who you never know, he's already going into, is it year 3 or 4 already? Man, I don't really remember, but at this rate, you might be expecting a guy like Paolo to make that kind of MVP caliber jump. Of course, this past year, he kind of did it already, averaging about 26 points a game, but the efficiency was lacking. If Desmond Bain can open up the offense for the Magic and get Paolo even more looks, and Bain can kind of mess up the defense's attention on certain guys, and Paolo can take advantage of it, it's likely that he can vault himself into the conversation as maybe a top 5 to 7 MVP vote getter, and really position the Magic to be in a great spot in the postseason this year. And the Atlanta Hawks, while they didn't make one massive swing, well, actually they made a couple. They made one massive swing, and that was to get Kristaps Porzingis from the Boston Celtics. And with good health, he could also transform that team's offense and defense as well as a great shot blocker. Um, but also the moves that they made around the margins of bringing in Nikhil Alexander Walker, which may be the most underrated move that any team makes this offseason, and also up in their 3-point shooting even more by bringing in Luke Kennard. So they made moves around the margins. They really bolstered their bench depth, and they got their new center. But of course, Porzingis was dealing with a bunch of illness related stuff that kept him out for a while, and it's not clear cut that he's going to be healthy going into next year. But he was also lighting things up for, um, oh my gosh, where is Latvia? I believe Kristaps Porzingis is from Latvia. He was lighting things up in the Euro Basket tournament as well. I think he had a 40 spot in his final game in Eurobasket this year. But regardless, both the Magic and the Hawks, based on their offseason moves that they made, they could be huge, huge contenders to really shake things up in the East and challenge the Milwaukee Bucks. But at this rate, it might be the Milwaukee Bucks challenging them if the Magic or the Hawks, or I could have also put a team like the Detroit Pistons in there, but I feel like things might go a little bit downhill for them after the whole Malik Beasley situation, and they lost Tim Hardaway Jr. to the Nuggets in free agency. So they're not really going to be the same look as a team. They lost a lot of 3-point shooting help, and especially with Beasley, a guy that was runner up for sixth man of the year. They definitely lost a lot of offensive firepower, and it might come back to haunt them. So I didn't feel as comfortable putting the Pistons in there, but the Magic and the Hawks, with the moves that they made, I feel as though they didn't just get marginally better. They got good enough to where they can compete for a top 3 to 4 seed in the Eastern Conference, both of those teams. And it's going to be a matter of who they push out, but all of these teams listed, I feel like could eventually be a second round matchup for the Milwaukee Bucks, or even a conference finals matchup if Giannis were to backpack and carry this team that far. So a lot of interesting franchises with, young talent trying to prove themselves and get themselves to a point where they're really competing for a title. Going against a guy like Giannis who's already done it before and is trying to get back to the mountaintop. There's going to be a lot of storylines to look into next year, but those are just a few of the teams that I feel like will be the best competition for the Bucks in 25-26. But all right, that'll be it for me today. Thank you very much for tuning in for another episode of Bucks Latest presented by Fan Arch. Again, as always, I've been your host, Dean Simon, and make sure to leave a comment down below. Do you think any of these teams can compete with the Bucks? Do you think the Bucks can compete with any of these teams? Let me know what you think down below. Also, hit that subscribe button, turn on post notifications, and I will see you guys in the next one. Go Bucks.